Right, here's my hollow punch. It fits neatly over that pin, and I just need to bend that out ever so slightly. And if I test this again, we'll see if I've made any impression on that. Oh yes, quite definitely. That sounded quite promising. I'll try it on the 15th of a second position. Yep, I'm going to go and test that now on my shutter speed tester, and I will use this again if I need to make any fine adjustment to that, though I strongly suspect that's going to be quite good. The shutter speeds, when they were set, they are expected to be within 20% of the marked speed and have repeatability of 10%. Well, 20% of the marked speed is quite a lot, so it means that if you were setting for 1 second, you'd be looking anywhere between 1200 milliseconds and 800 milliseconds. So it's quite a wide margin. But it's certainly quite achievable to get them within specification quite well, and you can, if it's all clean and well serviced and nothing is damaged in there, you could probably get your speeds to within 10% fairly well, which is more than enough for film. I mean, 1 stop is double or half the exposure time, so half a stop is proportional, 0.7 or 1.4. Anyway, let me check this. I don't know why I bother keeping that speed tester sometimes. That's certainly well within 10% of the marked speed, and that'll be absolutely fine. So, getting the rest of this together. Well, here we have the 2 rings. This one couples to our speed settings ring. This one here couples to the aperture at the back. And these two are coupled together. Where's the, yeah, like that. So that you can set your light value here, whatever it might happen to be. And it will set your aperture and speed settings together. I just want to clean these lightly with a bit of naphtha just to remove any grit and dust. They don't really require any lubrication, or shouldn't do. Just want to get the dust and dirt off there. If you had a problem with roughness or corrosion, perhaps there's some sand or something had gotten there and abraded stuff up, you might give those a very light wipe with some synthetic grease where they interact. But I'm certainly not doing anything like that here. Right, so I'll put these in place. Now, there's a notch on the bottom of this aperture ring, has to couple with this tab here. Now it sort of sits on there in a pretty half-hearted sort of fashion. So you need to look closely to make sure it's sitting there. This tab here, this little slot, needs to couple with the speed settings ring up here. So we'll get that in place. Where are we? There's the tab. That's coupled there. And are we coupled here? No, not yet. Now it is. So now we have the aperture and the shutter speed sitting where they should be. Here's the front plate. I'll give that a wipe because that looks a bit, oh, it's got some corrosion here. I'm going to scrape that off with a screwdriver tip, and then I'm going to give that a little bit of a polish. Now, almost certainly some moisture's got in there, and yeah, it's quite few bumps and lumps here. Now that would just mean that things were, the front control rings would probably be a bit stiff to move. It wouldn't have affected the function of the shutter apart from that, but yeah, it's just a bit lumpy. That stuff needs to come off, that needs to be smooth. I don't know that I'll even need to do anything with polishing away of that. I think just cleaning it will probably do the job, and I will give that a little wipe of molybdenum paste. Here's the speed settings ring, and this piece of course sits over this piece, so this piece has probably got some patches of roughness on there too. So I'm just wiping that carefully, having a look at what those lumps and bumps are. Yeah, that there. This is chrome plated, but chrome is fairly porous, and if moisture gets through it, you can get corrosion coming up underneath, which will bubble the chrome up. You end up with little lumps on it. That'll be fine. Okay, so where's our shutter? Is that all still connected up? Yes. The shutter speed settings ring goes on first. Connects up over the same position, the same tabs. There and there. The front plate. These little notches form our shutter speed settings detents, and I'm just going to wipe a little bit on the front plate here where that rough spot was. This only goes on in one position. You'll see that there is a hole here that lines up with a post here on the shutter. Like that, and then the retaining ring goes on the front. You can see I'm using a toothpick to move that. That looks good. Let's set this to something mid-range in the EV value so we can check that the action is working smoothly. Now that feels a bit stiff to me, so I'm going to back this off another position. I'm exposing a screw hole here that we can put the locking screw in. That's probably still tighter than it needs to be. That feels good. Now there's a screw hole there, that's where our tiny locking screw goes. Get this in position. Be careful not to lose those screws. They are very short, very small, and easily lost. So I don't have any spares, and probably no one else does either. Alright, so that shutter is all good now, and all it requires is the lenses cleaned up and put back. Let's try this. We'll set it to 1 second. Where are we? There, and we'll set the self timer. I'll move that. Set the self timer. Yep. Set the speed to 1 second. Let's release the shutter. Self timer's running down. See the blades stay firmly closed. The shutter opens and closes. That's all good. Very good. So, another shutter done. I just need to clean up its lens set and put them back. Now that front group there looks absolutely lovely, doesn't it? Well, some of those dots, the bigger dots you can see there, they're on this face. The haze is on the other side. It looks mostly like dust to me. We'll find out. This is the centre group that screws into the front of the shutter, and this is the rear group, and that looks pretty good. But these will need to be cleaned up with some glass cleaner before I can pop them back in place. Normal domestic glass cleaner, it'll work nicely. Let's start with that awful front group. The innermost surface has got those dots on it. Will they clean off, or are they permanent marks in that coating? They look like they are permanent marks in that coating. Now, what caused those blemishes? We're never going to know. The front, this is probably more serious. It's very, very dusty. So I'll try blowing away any loose dust. Now, with the cotton bud quite wet, we'll very lightly wipe that to lift off that filth. And then I'll start with another cotton bud. And wipe that glass lightly again. And in doing so, I'll have lifted off all of that loose dust. Now I can wipe it a bit firmer. And I'll just very lightly dampen the cotton bud. Wipe that surface, rotating it as I go, and wipe that surface dry with the other end of the cotton bud, and that looks absolutely awful. Just look, those bright dots that you see, they are reflections from this face, and they are problems with the coating there. Whether that was a fungus or whether that's damage from something, some liquid that is sprayed on there, droplets of something that have caused that problem, I don't know. I think even if I put a high-powered glasses on, I probably couldn't tell. But even a lens in that state, which is less than wonderful, will probably transmit light quite well. And there may be no real problem with getting a good image with a lens like that, though it looks pretty flaming ugly. Anyway, that's what we've got, because it's not going to come any cleaner. While I've got it there, I've got to clean the threads on that to remove old grease and so forth. And the dust and rubbish that it will have picked up over time. When you're doing this, be careful to keep away from the glass itself, because you accidentally wipe a tiny amount of grease on that lens while you're cleaning the mount. It can be really hard to get it off again. That's fine. And here's our centre group. This time I will use some naphtha to clean this inside and out, keeping away from the glass. And the inside of this is quite greasy. and the front side of that is quite dirty where it's picked up dust in that grease. But while doing this, I'm keeping the cotton bud away from the glass surface itself, because I don't want to have to spend ages trying to clean that surface if I accidentally touch it with something greasy. Alright, that's okay. I'll clean the glass in here. This looks, it looks like there's a scratch around the inside edge there. I don't know that it really is. It may be just a loss of paint there anyway. There is a hole in this, and it's possible that someone put a tool in there to try and unscrew the lens rather than using the slots. This glass looks really good. There's absolutely no problem with that. And this face, that face looks really good too. I'll screw that into the shutter. So last blast with the air to make sure that there's no dust in there. Put that front group in, or the centre group really, centre element. Since it's only a triplet, they're not really groups. Take this tool and just lightly tighten that up. Looking at the glass to make sure it's good. It is fine. I'll pop the front element in there. I haven't put any grease on that yet. There, I've just wanted to put that in there to keep the dust out. And let's look at the rear group. Now the rear group, we'll see what the glass is like on that. It looks pretty good. The innermost surface, one that faces the blades, it's fine. We'll clean that, put the lens in place on the back of the shutter. That doesn't need to be any more than finger tight. Let's try this glass surface. This is grimier, but again it looks good. Little bit of oily sheen there. I'll just have another go at that. That means that there's probably a degree of grease has been near this. That looks fine. That's good. So we've got an ugly front element, but having said that, it'll probably produce fine photos all the same. And we have the other glass elements are great. Just clean the front of that. Now that shutter is ready to put back on the camera body. And then we would need to put our focus scale ring in place. Now this was the focus scale ring from this camera. It's lost its scale at some stage, and someone's put a piece of tape on here quite carefully, or paper probably, and glued it in place and carefully marked the distances on that tape. Very neat handwriting. Wish I could write as neat as that. But I have a spare ring here, and it's difficult to think back as to how you get these parts, but I think that what happened was I had a retinette like this, And like the previous camera I serviced, the camera had been dropped on its nose and the shutter had been destroyed as a result. The case was damaged, and so I ended up with a few spare parts, this being one of them. Just checking to see if this has got its screws in place, and it doesn't, so I'm going to need to take the screws out of here and transfer them to this. The screws are very small. Somebody was asking me about the size of these screws and where you could get them, and since we're going to have them out, or one out at least, and 3 out, we can measure them and find out. Okay, so that is pretty small. I'm going to need calipers to measure that. Those screws are tiny. They're 1.2 millimetre diameter and 1.6 millimetre long, and that's from the top to the tip of the point. So they could be fun finding them. The last lot of tiny screws I got them on AliExpress, and I just searched for grub screws. Here you can see a packet of some very similar screws that I bought from AliExpress. These ones are flat on the ends, they don't have the point, but the ones that you want have the point on the end. But you'd have no problem choosing which sort you want. These ones were 1.2 millimetre by 2 millimetres in length. I could certainly put a point on the end of one if I needed to, and that would work fine. Right, to get the shutter onto the camera body, which I'll do next, we need to achieve a couple of things at once. We need our shims on the back of the shutter. We need to line up the cocking shaft and the release shaft with the matching pieces here, and we need to have the flash connection connected up here. That little plastic thing there, we've got to get the wire in there and do that thing up tight. Now I think in practice the best way I can approach this is to take those shims off in the first instance, because they're likely to get lost while I'm trying to get this wire connected. Got to get the wire connected first. Let me just blow the dust out of here and see if we can get this wire in place. Now these are always awkward. The screw is screwed into plastic. As a result of being screwed into plastic, the threads are a little bit tight. We're trying to squash, get that connection made. It's together, but it doesn't look tight. Okay, I've got to get my shims in position. I'm going to do that by putting the paper shim in first, putting the metal shim on top of it, hoping that they stay aligned, and lower my lens and shutter assembly in place. That little plastic flash thing is not falling into position very well there. It's almost in. I think the release is not coupled up correctly. Here it is, it's dropped in. Now I'm going to cock that and see if the shutter cocks and releases. Okay, so that's together. That went fairly smoothly as these things go. I've got my retaining ring here, and the retaining ring, I'm going to get that started with the tip of a screwdriver, because I can see what I'm doing down in there. Yeah, that retaining ring's lost a lot of black paint, presumably from past efforts to get it loose or tight. That's in place, and I've got the correct tool here. When I say the correct tool, the tool I finally got around to making fairly recently, and I can tighten that up just like that. So that's back together, and all I've got to do now is set the focus. And for that I'll want a focusing screen, a jeweler's loop, and a cable release. There's all the pieces. Basically the technique is fairly simple. Looking out the window to my right here, I've got a view on the horizon with some power poles on it, make a lovely high contrast, effectively infinity target. So I'll cock the shutter. My cable release is a locking type, so when I press that in, it'll lock the shutter open. I need to set this to B and fully open, f3.5. Got my loop. Set my focus screen here. The focus screen is one stolen from an SLR. It has a focus aid in the middle. Split image focus aid makes it much easier to pick the point of focus correctly. I'll look out the window and I'll get this lined up and back when I'm done. Okay, at that point an infinity target is sharp on the film plane. So all I need to achieve, and I say all because sometimes it's not as easy as you'd hope, is to get my focus scale ring back on here at the infinity position and tighten the screws up. So first thing I've got to check is that the screws here are not sticking out where they'll catch on this while I'm trying to fit it. Otherwise it becomes very hard to adjust things. I'll back those off slightly, check that they're not sticking out. That one is. Okay, so my infinity marker's at the top here. Just got to line up with that triangle at the top. Here's the infinity sign there. So I'll drop this on, and without disturbing the lens, bring my focus scale ring round to the infinity position, like that, and do up the 3 tiny screws. That moves nicely. Now I've got a fair idea why that moves nicely. It's because I can put the grease in. So leaving this at the infinity position, let's lift this ring off again and put the grease in the lens that I should have put there to start off with. Now in this case, before I lifted that ring off, I took note of where things are, and my focus mark here comes right up to the edge of that red triangle. I want to see how far I need to turn this down to as far as the lens will go. it'll only turn round to that point. So that's hard down. So if I get it back in and turn it there, that I know that I've got it in the right start position. I have in mind that this lens might be multi-start. I'm using some synthetic grease and a couple of spots around here should do the job nicely. Back that lens up until you hear it click in. It means that you've picked up the thread. If we started in the right place, the red triangle will stop somewhere over here. No, we haven't. We're half a turn out from where we were. Let's try there. Yep, that was the right place, and we had it here. Our red triangle was right on the edge of that point there. That was our infinity position. I'll put my focus scale ring back on, bring it round, tighten the screws, and then I will check, looking out the window, to make sure that everything is exactly as I left it. I can already see I've moved that. Let's get those screws backed off. Yeah, I did. The lens should have been there, and my focus scale ring should have been hard against the stop. There. Yeah, I bumped that before I got the screws tightened. Now I'll check my focus again and report back. Okay, so this is all good to go. Just check the self timer. That's running down nicely. Okay, so that's the third type of shutter for the Retinettes, the later type. And if you were only doing the shutter, that would be all you would need to be doing. Of course, in this case, I want to take these three camera bodies completely to bits. I'm going to tighten up that rewind while I'm here, because the bodies need servicing too. I've done the shutter first this time on all these three cameras because I just know people are very impatient. They focus on the shutter as being the thing that they notice that is not correct, and they're unwilling to delve into the rest of it unless they absolutely have to. So bodies next. This was the third type, so we've done the three different Retinette type 022s, and it wasn't all that difficult.